Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 42 of the Rickenbacker 620/12 string build. And in this episode we're going to be polishing up the finish that we put on a few weeks ago. But before we get into that, I just need to clear up something that was said in last week's episode that isn't actually correct. And that relates to these two output jacks that the guitar has. Now, it is still my belief that these are mislabeled and that this is the stereo jack and that's the mono one, but it's not a normal mono jack. And I think that's what is indicated here in the schematic. This is in fact a switching mono jack. So when there's nothing connected into it, it actually separates these two feeds so that there's no circuit there anymore, which will enable the stereo socket to work properly. I haven't got one of those, so I'm going to stick with the wiring that I've got for the time being. I'll get one of those on order and I'll have to swap it out at a later date. And then hopefully all of this should work absolutely perfectly. Okay, so with that out of the way, we can move on to the job in hand, which is getting this finish flatted off and polished up. Now, traditionally I've used nothing more complicated than various grades of wet and dry paper to flat and polish this finish. And then we finish that up with some kind of polishing compound and a power mop. More recently, I've tried another approach and I've been using this Super Acrylics and Trizac pads. But for this particular build, I thought I would try and kind of combine the two approaches to see what effect that has. Now, this is relatively flat already, so there won't be a huge amount of sanding down needed to get it into a state where we can polish it. But I thought once we'd done the Super Acrylics and the Trizac pads, we could then get some compound onto it and a mop and just see how much better that finish is and whether it's actually worth doing or not. However, the process of putting the mop on these does create quite a lot of mess and takes quite a lot of cleaning up, especially in kind of control cavities and stuff where the finish is quite rough. That polish gets stuck into there. So before I start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask off all these recesses, so the pickups, the control cavity. I'm going to mask off the fretboard and then we can get started. Okay, and with that masked off, I'm just going to take a little bit of this paste wax and I'm just going to kind of rub that into the screw holes just to help keep some of that water out, stop it from swelling the wood and cracking the finish. I'm not planning on using a huge amount of water on this, but I will inevitably have to use some. Okay, and with that done, I've got myself a bowl of warm soapy water. I've got some little squares of initially 600 wet and dry, and I've got a little rubber or eraser. So I'm just going to soak my first bit of paper in the water for a few seconds and just start working my way over the top, just sanding in small circles. And the aim at this stage is just to take the light orange peel that we put in the spraying process out, and I can see that that's already kind of pretty much gone. You don't have to get every single tiny speck of orange peel out at this stage. The light stuff you can kind of leave in for subsequent grades of paper. But that's coming up really nice. Having my new spray booth contraption set up is a bit of a game changer for spraying, because it's just enabling me to get a nice flat finish, whereas before all the overspray was getting sucked onto the wet lacquer and that was giving it a very rough, almost sandpaper texture finish. That's no longer the case, and it's just making this job much easier. So I'm going to continue working my way across the top now, and I'll join you back once we're ready to move on to the next grit. Okay, so that's the whole thing now rubbed down to 600 grit. It's gone quite well. I'm really pleased with how quickly I've managed to get through that, and so far so good. There was a couple of little runs on the side, particularly down here, which kind of raises the question, what do you do if you're spraying something and you notice a run developing? And especially in clear coats, this holds true. My advice would be just leave it. Don't put any more finish on until that kind of area's dried up properly, but don't try and do anything to it. And then when you come to this stage, you can deal with them. Because if you think about it logically, if you're spraying your clear coats, especially the final clear coats properly, it's going to be at least 50% thinner. And what will happen as this cures, that thinner will leave that material and it will shrink back. So what might have looked like quite a horrendous drip when you first applied it, by the time you've let it cure for a few weeks, it will have shrunk back significantly and you can just flat it out. And as long as you're careful, you should be absolutely fine. If you're getting runs to the extent where it's like a bloody curtain effect running down your guitar, you just need to sort your spraying technique out. But don't think for a second that I'm so perfect at spraying this that I never get them. I do, and they just need dealing with appropriately. Okay, so next up, I'm going to take this up a grade, and I've now got some 800 grit super acylics that I'm going to continue with this. And this should be quite a short process because all we're doing realistically is we're taking out those 600 grit scratches. We're not trying to remove huge amounts of material anymore. We're just refining the surface. I'm a big fan of this super acylics. It is great stuff. It's not cheap, but it lasts a long time and it gives a really nice even finish. So that looks like the top pretty much done. So I'm going to continue with this and get the rest of the guitar up to this level, and I'll join you back for the next stage. Okay, so that's everything done to 1200 grit now on the super acylics, and it's looking really, really nice. All of the little shiny spots have gone, bar one or two very, very minor ones, which we will deal with in the next stage, which is we're going to use some 3000 and 6000 grit Trizac pads. Now I understand that these need to be used wet, or at least can be used wet. So I'm just going to put a little bit of fresh water on there. Now you can use these on a machine. I don't really have a suitable machine, so I'm just going to do it by hand, which I've done before and it worked great. And once again, because we're not really doing anything other than removing the 1200 grit scratches, if we've done our job right, this needn't be a long job. And I think that looks good enough, so we'll go again with the 6000 pad. really hard to get in the camera, but from where I'm standing, that's got quite a nice sheen to it. And if I was doing this as like a replica of a vintage guitar that's had a bit of life and a bit of wear on it, and where the finish has oxidized a little bit, I'd be very happy just to leave it at that. It looks quite nice, but it's not the finish I want. So next up, I'm going to break out my polishing mop. I'm going to get a little bit of compound on the top, and we'll see what kind of a finish we can achieve. And what I'm going to be using to polish this is some of this. It's Rickenbacker G3 compound. I've been using this for donkey's years. Not with this particular tube. I've got through more than that. But it is a very, very, very good polishing compound. Now, it's designed to be used wet, so we need to get a little bit more fresh water onto here. And the beauty of this stuff is it breaks down with moisture and friction. So as you go over this with the mop, the cutting granules in it that are doing the polishing actually get finer and finer. Now it is a bit of a messy job, but I'm hoping it'll come out absolutely bloody lovely. And that took a minute or so just to get that final polish on, and hopefully you'll be able to see there that has come up absolutely beautifully. And I don't know if it's going to come out in the camera, but it's really kind of made that figure in the top pop as well. So yeah, very, very happy with that. So next up is we get this turned over. We do exactly the same to the back. Now I'm going to have to be careful on these sides because they're only very thin and you can burn through with the mop very easily. So I'll probably do the sides and the back of the neck just by hand with some of this stuff on a cloth, and hopefully that will give us enough of a shine. When you're doing these thin areas, you don't really need to polish much to make a really good job of them by hand. So I'm sure that'll be absolutely fine. Okay, and that's everything polished up now, even the headstock, which is looking quite nice. Can't get it to shine. There we go. Looking lovely. So yeah, happy with that. So I'm just going to get all this tape off now. And I'm going to have to give the whole guitar a good clean up and check to see if there's any kind of little bits where we haven't quite got the polish as good as we might want it. It's really difficult until you clean it because there's smears and there's moisture and all sorts of nastiness going on, which kind of makes it difficult to see exactly how well you've done. But I'm pretty confident that we're where we need to be with this now. And happily, masking those off has actually kept the worst of the crap out of there. So I'll give this a good clean up and then we can come back and look and see exactly how well we've done. And hopefully we'll be able to get this to reflect. Yeah, I think that looks absolutely gorgeous. Really has come up nicely, even if I do say so myself. And there's the headstock. And I actually think now that everything's polished up and cleaned up, that logo really does work quite nicely. It's still a little bit raised from the rest of the headstock, and I actually quite like that. So that's the polishing done. The next big job will be getting the hardware onto this thing, getting it all put together. But I'm going to save that for the next episode. So I'll be back in a couple of days' time with that. Until then, as always, like if you've liked, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.